Okay guys, welcome back to our second episode of our Angry Zombie series. If you're new here, my name's Gino and I make games, Unity games to be specific. We are currently on our third series of making games. In the first one we made a simple 2D platformer. In the second one we also made a clone of the Breakout game where you have to break the blocks with a ball and a paddle. And now currently in our third series we are currently making a clone of Angry Birds, but instead of Angry Birds we're going to call it Angry Zombies, and instead of birds obviously we're going to be using zombies. So in yesterday's episode if we open this up we can have a look and see what we did yesterday. So yesterday's episode we created a new project, and then we also went and set up our main menu, and then we linked our main menu to our game scene. And then in today's video we're going to start on some of our gameplay. We're going to start by creating our slingshot, and we're going to try and get this working, and then depending on if that goes well we will move on and try and get our camera to follow the objects that you that you slingshot out of the slingshot. So we'll see how that goes on. So let's go ahead and open up Unity. I have opened it up just to save some time again. So this is where we left off yesterday. If we play our game we should get no errors hopefully, and we should be able to press play game and it takes us to our game scene, which it does. So our game scene is currently empty, so let's go ahead and start. So the first thing we want to do is, let's see what's first on the list. Start creating the playing platform using the tile palette. Okay, so let's go add in some tiles to our game. So we'll switch over to our game scene, and then in here let's expand this quickly. In here we want to go ahead and add in an empty object. Let's call this floor. That's not how you spell floor. And then in our floor we can go ahead and add in some of our art. So let's see, where is our tile palette? Sound, no, prefabs maybe, tiles. So they should be over here. So let's see what this one is. Okay, so this is the end one, so we'll add one over here, and then I think it was 8, no not 8, 6, yeah, so 6 is the middle one. So we will add this one. We'll set the first one, let's say the height to -4. What does that give us? Okay, so we'll make it -4.5 maybe, yeah, or -4.3. That's perfect. And then we'll go ahead and set the Y value of our next one to the same, -4.3 I think it was, so that way they look like they're at the same height. And then what we can do is simply just copy and paste this one, and then we'll just move them and put them next to each other so that we can get a continuous floor. And we'll keep doing this just to create a simple floor. So there probably is an easier way to do this using a tile palette, but for our simple game we are just going to drag them and drop them just like we're doing now. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we could probably just copy all of them maybe. So if we copy all of them and paste them, we can move them like that, and we'll extend this off the screen a little bit, because when we slingshot our object, what we want is the object to actually fly over past the end of the scene into the the zombies and the structure that it's going to break. So we'll keep it that length for now, and then let's go ahead and start creating our slingshot. So we can go and add all of these into our floor just like this, just so we can tidy up our project again. And we'll go ahead and close that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create another empty object, and we'll call this slingshot. So under here, this is going to be our parent object of our slingshot, and then we're going to add in all of our our graphics into this object. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go and reset this. So put this at 0. That's great. And now we need to find our slingshot. So let's go sling. Okay, clearly it's not called slingshot, so we'll go under art and find it. Yeah, it's not called slingshot. So let's go ahead and drag this in, somewhere, and we need this one as well. Okay, so first of all, let's make sure these two are both a child object of our parent slingshot. And then just to make this clearer, I'm just gonna name it left, and then we'll name this one right, because this one's gonna go on the right obviously, and this one's gonna go on the left. So if we go and drag these into position like this, where is it? We could probably get away with doing that, maybe. Doesn't need to be perfect, but there we go. So let's go ahead, well actually we're gonna have to do that again, so let's just go ahead and reset that. And then what we want to do is reposition the left one like we just did, somewhere over here, just so it looks a bit seamless, like this. Perfect. So now we're going to drag in our parent object slingshot into the right location, so we'll probably put that somewhere over there. So let's see what that looks like in our game. So maybe if we move it over a little bit, that'll give us some room to drag out our sling and then release it. So that looks good. And then let us go, first of all, just to get rid of this blue background, let's go ahead and create no, not an empty, sorry, let's go ahead and create a UI image. No, we don't want to do that, sorry. So let's go ahead and create a sprite and a square sprite, and then we'll call this background. And then we want to drag in the correct image, or we can just look for it under here. So let's see, I think it's called background. So let's see if we go all the way to the top maybe. So yeah, there it is. So that's the background that we want. So if we select our background image, we can reposition it. So to do that, let's just go and, where's our background? We could probably just drag it and make it a lot bigger, maybe. And we'll probably just put it like that, I think. Or what are we doing? Let's make this bigger so we can see. Okay, so let's make this maybe like that, I guess. So that's what our background will look like. So actually I don't like that, let's do that a different way. In fact, we'll delete the background and we'll put it in our canvas later on so that it looks better. You can see the entire background and it's not been enlarged by stretching it. So for now, let's just start working on our slingshot. So what we want to do is we want to create some more empty objects, and these are going to be references to positions on this slingshot. So let's go ahead and create another empty object, and we will call this one so we'll call this strip 0, and we'll copy and paste that, and then for this one we will call it strip 1, and then we want to create another empty object called, where's empty object, there it is. Then we want to create another one called center, not center, center, like that. Then we'll just copy and paste that, and we'll change this one to idle. So the center one is gonna where is it? Let's try. We'll make this bigger quick so we can work in our scene. So this center game object is gonna what's it called? We're gonna add it into the center of the slingshot, and it's gonna be like a reference to the center of the slingshot. And the idle one is going to be the position of the skull that we're gonna be using. That's where we're gonna set the position of it. So when you're not pulling it back, it's gonna sit in this idle position. So we'll put that probably like centered off to the left a little bit, just like that. Okay, and then we want to go and create another 2 lines under effects. Let's go and create a line, and we will call this one so I did this wrong, so let's go ahead and call this strip 0, We'll copy and paste that and call this one strip1, like that. And then these two, we will change the name of them because we actually wanted to create them as line objects, so we'll keep those like that. So these, now we need to change the name of them, and we'll call this one position of strip 0. So that's gonna hold the position of our first strip position, so we'll put that over there, and this is gonna we're gonna use this to set the position of our slingshot. So when you pull it back, we're gonna see the actual slingshot being pulled from these two. So this one is where the first one's gonna start, and then we're gonna add another one onto the second left side. So if we change the name of this one to strip, well, we'll just add position to the front, just like that. So position strip 1, we will go ahead and move that to roughly on the left side, in the middle on the left side, somewhere like that. So that looks good. So now let's see what's next. Now we want to go ahead and create a script for this. So where is our, in our script folder, let's go ahead and create another C# script, and we'll call this slingshot. Just like that, and we'll go ahead and open that, and then in here, so let's go make that full screen. Let's just go put that over there. So in here we can now create our all of our our transforms and our line renderers, so that we can drag and drop all of these things that we just made. So let's go ahead and do that. So first we want to create 2 line renderers. To do this, we'll create an array. So let's go public, so we can access in the inspector, public line renderer, create an array out of this, and we'll call it line renderers. And then we want to do the same thing for transforms, public transform. We'll create an array out of that, and we will call this the strip positions, just like that. And then we want to create another transform for our center. Doesn't need to be an array because we've only got one center. And then we'll do the same thing for idle like that, idle position, and then we'll just go ahead and call this center position. Okay, that's looking good. So now what we want to do is we want to create a boolean. So let's go and call this boolean is mouse down. So that is going to be set to true whenever we click on our slingshot and drag it back. The is mouse down boolean is going to be set to true, and whenever you release it, we're going to swap it and set it to false. So let us go and create. Well, first of all, let's go and set. Well, actually, let's save this, and then we'll go back into Unity, and we can drag and drop our slingshot script onto our slingshot. Make sure you drag it onto the parent object. So let's go slingshot, and then now you can see here we have access to the game objects, well, not the game objects, the transform and the line renders that we made. So let's go ahead and add 2. Well, we'll go and set our strip. Why is this not working? We'll go and set this to 2 so we can drag in the 2 elements that we made. And then for the line renderers, we also have 2 of them, so we'll put the number 2 there. And now we can go and drag in these objects. So let's go strip position 0 in there, strip position 1 in there, strip, which one have we got? Strip 1 there, and strip 0. And then we can drag in our center position as well as our idle position. So we go ahead and save that. So now when we play the game later, we shouldn't have any problems. So now let's go ahead and set the positions of these. So for both line renderers, we want to set the position count to 2. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go line renderers of, well, we need to get the first one. So at index 0 dot set, or dot position count is equal to 2, and then we want to do the exact same thing for our second one in our array. And then after that we want to set both line renderer's position to the position of the strip position, if that makes sense. So let's go line renderers, if I can type this properly. Okay, let's see what's happening. Line renderers at index of 0 dot set position 0 comma strip positions of the first one in the array dot position. Okay, so then we want to do the same thing, so we'll copy and paste that and change this from 0 to 1, and then we'll change this from 0 to 1. So that's good. Okay, and then after that we want to go and create another function, and in this function we are going to reset the position of our strips. So let's go and say public void reset, well, not just reset, but reset position, or reset strips. Let's go reset strips, like that. And then in here we just want to go and say set strips, and we want to go idle position dot position. So set strips is a function that we're going to create right now, so let's go ahead and create that. So let's go public void set strips, and in here we are going to require a vector 3, and we will call this position. So now we should get no errors. So our reset strip function has figured out that we have now created a new function called set strips, and passing in a vector 3 of which is our position. So that's looking good. So now in here all we want to do is we want to go ahead and set the position of our line renderers to the position that we pass in. So let us say line renderers at index of 0 dot set position 1 comma position. So that's the position that we are passing in through our function. So in this case we are passing in our idle position, so that's good. So now we want to copy that and do this to our second one in our array. Cool. So now let's see what's next. Now we want to, first of all, we need to create our we need to change the value of is mouse down whenever we click on our slingshot, otherwise nothing's going to happen. So let's go ahead and create our functions here called, I think it's called on mouse down, on mouse, yeah, so on mouse down. In here, whenever our mouse, well, whenever you've clicked on this slingshot, we want to change the is mouse down to equal true. And then we want to do the same thing, so when you release the mouse and you release the slingshot and the object goes flying, we want to go and say public, that's not how you spell public, so public void on mouse up. And in here we just want to do the opposite and say is mouse down is equal to false. Okay, so now we can go into our update function here and say, okay, first of all, this needs to be in our start function rather, and not in our update function. So we'll swap that and put that in there. So in our update function, we're going to go ahead and say if mouse down. So if we are clicking or if we are dragging our slingshot out, we want to do the following. So let us do we need to go create a vector 3, and this is going to record our mouse position. So we'll call this mouse position. And we're going to get this from our input dot mouse position. Cool, like that. And then what we want to do is, why is this? Okay, that's fine. So now we want to go ahead and change our Z position of our mouse to equal to 10. So to do that, let's just go and say mouse position dot, I think just dot Z, yeah, is equal to 10. So that should work. We should get rid of that error, which we do. So things are looking good so far. Hopefully we don't get any bugs when we run this and play it, but we shall see. So let us now go and say, we now want to go and say, what do we want to do? First of all, let's go and say set strips to our mouse position. So this is going to, whenever we drag out our strips, which is actually our slingshot, they're going to set the position of them. So whenever you move the mouse, you'll see them move with it. So I think that is it. Other than when we are not dragging on our slingshot, we want to just reset our strips back to the original values, so that the object, in our case, which will be our skull, will reset into the idle position. And then obviously you can drag it out again and start the game again. So let's see if we go ahead and save this, and let's see what we get. Hopefully we don't get any errors with this. It's so far looking good, so let's go ahead and play the game. So let's see, hopefully in our console we don't get any errors, which is fine. We do not. Okay, so far we cannot pull out anything because we haven't actually added in our colliders. So if we go onto slingshot, let's go ahead and add in a box collider, 2D, because we're making a 2D game. So if we make this bigger like this, now whenever we click on this, whenever we click in this area, we'll make it smaller so that you can't drag out the slingshot from here. So we'll make this bigger because I think our idle position is somewhere over here. So probably like that, maybe something like that. So whenever you click in this area and hold your mouse button down and drag it out, that is going to pull back the slingshot, and you'll will hopefully see that. So let's go ahead, and I think we need to go ahead and set is triggered to equal to true. And then what we also want to do is, for both of our line renderers, we want to go and say we want them to use the world space. So we'll go ahead and tick that just like that, and then we'll save that. So, and then we want to change our position of strip 0 to, we want to change the order of it to 0. So change the order in the layer to set to 0, so when we pull it back, and if you move your mouse up and down like this, you'll see the slingshot lines will go behind the actual sling. So for our strip 1, we're going to go ahead and set that to 5, so that one I think will be in front of it, if I got the order right, hopefully. And then, well, first of all, let's go ahead and see if we play this. Hopefully things work. Okay, so there you can see our slingshot. So what happens if we pull back on it? Okay, so you can see we have a little bit of a bug. So whenever we release it, it sets it back to the original position. So let's go back and check our code and see what's happening. So have I missed out a step here? Okay, so in our update, if the mouse is down, then we set the position of Z to 10, and then we set our strip position. Let's see, what have I missed? Okay, so I missed a step. So in here we want to go and say mouse position is equal to camera dot main dot screen to world point, and then we want to pass in our mouse position into there. So hopefully if we save that and go back into our game, hopefully we now can see, or hopefully we can now pull our slingshot back and the sling will actually follow our mouse. So that works well. So yeah, there we go. So now we can pull back our slingshot and that's working really nicely. So the next thing what we want to do quickly is let's just go ahead and change the color of our slingshot, because we don't really want it to be white. So let's go ahead and change the start of it to this this dark color, and then the end to this lightish color, probably that one. Okay, so that's set. So we want to do the same thing to our next one. So that one. So now if we play our game, we should see the sling, or whatever they call these things, they should blend into it. So there we go, that looks better. So that looks good. In fact, I might change it around and say, let's see. So for strip 0, we're just gonna swap the colors around. So let's go for this one, we will put it like that, I think. So hopefully, let's see what that looks like. Okay, yeah, so that looks better. So you can see as you pull it out, it gets lighter towards the end, so it kind of looks like it's been stretched. And then closer to the slingshot, it stays that dark color. So that's looking good. Exactly what we wanted. So let's see what's next in our step. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and just change the width to this, so 0.2. Hopefully that will look good, because it's quite skinny at the moment. So let's play that and see what that looks like. Okay, yeah, so that looks a lot better. So now you can see we have like a mini slingshot. So whenever we pull this back and release it, our skull is going to go flying into like the rest of the scene. So let's go ahead and go out of gameplay, and then what we want to do is create another vector 3 called current position. So let's go vector 3 and we'll call this current position, and then we can go and in our update function we can now, instead of just using our mouse position, we can go and say current position is equal to our camera.main.screen to world point and pass in our mouse position, and then we can let's see, then we're going to have to change our mouse position in here. So when we set our strips, we want it to set to the current position instead of the mouse position. And then what we want to do is we want to actually clamp our slingshot. So when we pull it back, we don't want to be able to pull it back like forever. We want to be able to pull it back and then it stop at a certain point, like at a radius around the slingshot. So let's go ahead and see if we can do that. So to do that, let's go and say current position is equal to clamp boundary, we'll call it. So this is a method that we're going to create, and in here we will pass in our current position like that. So let's go ahead and create this method, probably just down here at the bottom. So let's go and say public void. We could probably create this as a private function just because we're not going to access it from outside this class, but we'll keep it as public for now. And then what we want to do is we want to pass in obviously a vector 3 because we're passing in our current position. So let's go and say what am I doing? Vector 3, and we'll just call this vector. And obviously this needs to return a vector 3 as well, so let's go and replace void with vector 3. And then in here we need to say vector.y is equal to math f dot clamp. So this is going to allow us to clamp our slingshot whenever we pull it out. So we'll go ahead and say clamp our vector dot y, because our y, because we want to clamp it on the y-axis. So y comma, actually wait, I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's go ahead and scratch that. We'll come back to this. But for now, we'll comment that out quickly, and we'll go back up to our comment that out quickly, because we're going to do that in the next step. First of all, we want to do we again want to clamp our, or not clamp it, but just restrict the player from pulling it out so much. So to do that, let's go and say current position is equal to center position, no, center dot position, sorry, center dot position. Oh, it's not working. Center position dot position. There we go. Plus our vector3 dot clamp magnitude. We were going to use our current position minus the center position dot position, and then in here we want to give it a max value. So let's just go and say max length. We'll go ahead and create that now, and that is going to be a float. So we can go float and copy the max length like that. So that should get rid of these errors, which it does, so that's good. So let's see. So if we save that, we can then go back to our our Unity project and see if this actually works. So we're going to have to set some values in the inspector, and let's see, do we make these public so that they show up? No, we did not. So let's go ahead and say public. That's not how you spell public again. So there we go, public float. So now that's going to show up in our inspector on our slingshot class. So if we go to our parent object, we should see a max length here. So we will probably say, we could probably set that to around 5 maybe. So let's see how that looks. So if we play this, hopefully this will work. Otherwise, we've got some solving to do. So there you go. So you can see as far as I pull it back, it's going to stop at 5. So I think 5 is probably a bit too much. So let's go ahead and say 3. See what that looks like. So if we pull this out, so yeah, that looks a bit better. We could probably go and say 3.5. So it will, whenever you pull out the slingshot, it's going to stop, and it'll probably, I think it's a length of 3. So technically this rotates in like a circle with a diameter of 6, I think, because each length is 3 roughly. So you get it. So that's what that looks like. So that's working nicely. So now what we want to do is, this is what I was doing earlier by mistake. So if we play our game, you can see that we pull it back and it goes to, well, let's just set that to 3 again, because 5 is a bit too much. So we'll set that to 3. We'll go play our game again. So now whenever you pull back the slingshot, you can see that if you drag it down, you can see it goes through the ground. We don't want that. We want to clamp it so that it will pretty much look like this, and then if you bring it down, it will like reduce in size, and then like go like that, and then increase again. So let's go and do that. So in here, let's go and uncomment that, because now that's what we're going to use as clamp boundary for. So our boundary is going to be set on the y-axis. So let's go ahead and uncomment this again. just like that. And then in here we want to go and do what we were doing earlier. So let's go and say vector dot y, because we want to clamp it on the y-axis going up and down. So vector y is equal to math f dot clamp, and then vector dot y bottom boundary So that is another value, another float value that we're going to have to create up in the inspector. And then we want to just set our max value, so we go ahead and set that to about 1000 maybe. And then we want to simply return our new vector, just like that. So let's go back up and we will copy and paste our float of our max value and change this to bottom boundary, like that. So that we will set in the inspector to the value that looks best. So we'll go ahead and play around with that and see. So let us see if we have done everything. So first of all, we'll save that, jump back into Unity, and we'll play this and see what we get. So we should get another field over here for our bottom boundary. So we'll set that in -3. Because we're going down, it's going to be a negative. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. So if we pull this back, so that works nicely. So you see it, let's set this to -3.2 maybe. That probably will look better. So if we pull it back, you can see that as soon as we reach the floor, it reduces the length of it and it stays at like a constant height. And then as soon as you move out and it's able to expand more, it does so. So that's working nicely. So that way we can never go into the ground. So we could probably make that about let's go and say -3.5 and see what that gives us. So okay, that we go into the ground. So let's go and put that -4 or -3.4. Okay, that's perfect. -3.4 is the value we want. So let's go ahead and save that. 3.4 like that. Okay, so that's working nicely. So now that we've got our slingshot working, well not working, but we can pull back on it, we want to go ahead and start creating the skull. So whenever we start the game, we want our skull to be sitting in the slingshot. So let us go and do that. So first of all, let's go and add in our skull from our from our art folder. We should have a skull over here. So there it is. So that's what it's going to look like. So it should start over there somewhere, but for now let's go ahead and reset that, and then we'll just make this a little bit bigger, maybe 1.2. We'll see, we could probably make that slightly bigger maybe. Let's see what it looks like in our... Now, we'll actually, let's make it maybe 1.4. 1.4 by 1.4 by 1.4. Okay, yeah, so that looks better. So we'll leave our skull at size or scale of 1.4 just to make it look better. And then what we want to do is we want to click on it. Well, let's go ahead and rename this so that it's just skull. So skull. And then let's go ahead and add in a rigid body. Rigid body 2D because it's a 2D game. And then add in another collider. So because our skull is roughly square, we could probably add in a box collider. Okay, so that looks good. We'll leave it like that. That looks good. So now what we want to do is we actually want to go into our project, and let's go ahead and create another folder and we'll call this materials. And in here let's go ahead and create another 2D physics material, and then we're going to set our bounciness to 0.3, and then we need to go and click on our skull object, and we actually need to go and set well, we need to go and drag in our new physics material into a material of our rigid body 2D, and we need to do the same for our box collider. So our material on our box collider, added those both into there, so that looks good. So now let us create a prefab out of this. So if we drag this, first of all, let's go ahead and create another folder, and we'll call this prefabs. And then what we want to do is drag in our skull into that folder. So now we've created a skull prefab, so we can go ahead and delete this out of our scene, and we're gonna instantiate it in our code. So whenever we start the game, we're gonna place a skull inside the slingshot from inside our code. So to do that, we're gonna need a reference to our prefab. So let's go and create public, what is it called? Public game object. Let's call it skull prefab, like that. So we'll drag and drop that in. Let's do that now before we forget. So slingshot, let's go and see where it is. Where has it gone? Did we save it? Okay, there it is. So let's go ahead and drag in our skull prefab, drop that into there in the inspector. So that looks good. And then what else do we need to do? We need to now create a rigid body. So let's go rigid body 2D, and we'll call this skull. And then we also want to go and access our collider. Let's go to collider 2D, and we'll call this skull collider, just like that. Add in a semicolon at the end. So that looks good. And then what we want to do is we actually want to go ahead and create another method called probably just skull, I think. So let's go private void skull, and then let's see what we want to do in here. This is where we want to create our skull. So to make this more understandable, let's go ahead and let's go change the name to create skull, just like that. Okay, so what we want to do in here, we want to go ahead and instantiate our skull. So we're going to say skull is equal to instantiate our skull prefab, and then we want to get our rigid body off of that. So rigid body 2D, because it's a 2D game, just like this. And then we can go ahead and get our collider off of this as well. So let's go and say skull collider is equal to skull get component collider 2D. Okay, looking good. So to do this, because we have a collider on it, we want to go ahead and set our collider to false. Well, we want to disable our collider, because if we don't, we won't be able to pull back on our slingshot. So let's go and say skull collider dot enabled is equal to false, like that. Okay, cool. And then let's see what else we have to do. So what's next? We have instantiated our skull, we got our collider off of it, and then let's go ahead, after that we need to go ahead and reset our strips. So we go ahead and call our reset strip function, just like that. Cool. So now let's go and say, where is in our so whenever we start playing the game, obviously we want our skull to appear as soon as the game starts. So we need to go and call our create skull method in our start function, because obviously our start function is called before the first frame. So let's go ahead and in our start function at the bottom, let's go and say create skull. So that should allow us to create the skull and place it in the right position. So let's see. So let's just save this and play the game. So this will probably won't work to begin with, but let's see what we got. So if we play it, what do we get? Do we get a skull somewhere? Okay, so we do get a skull there. It appears, but it's fallen out of the scene. So let's see if we can fix this. So let us say in our set, where do we go? So yeah, here's our code. So in our set strips, what we want to do is we want to go and say if our skull exists, let us how do we want to do this? Do we want to do this? Okay, let's just see. If we probably don't need to do this because our skull faces, or either way, if it's whichever way it's facing, it pretty much looks the same. So maybe we can probably skip that. We'll skip it for now and see. But for now, let's go ahead and say in our create skull, we actually want to set our what's it called, our kinematic to false somehow. So let's see, equal to okay, so let us have a look. So at the moment when we played our game, all our skull was doing was falling out of the scene. So let's see what we can do here. So if we go, let's see what we did. First of all, we created our skull. So let's have a look. So this should be working. Okay, we don't have. Let's go and open up our skull prefab and see if we did everything correctly. So let's see. So what did we do? Is our gravity scale set to 1? Yeah. Let's see, how do we fix this? Okay, first of all, let's just go ahead and add in our update, if after our set position, after our set strips, we want to go and say, like a capital if skull collider is true. Let's go and say skull collider dot enabled is equal to true. And then what do we want to do next? Let's see. So we're creating our skull, and then we want to set our skull dot is kinematic is equal to true. What else do we want to do? Let's see. Is mouse down? Yeah, that's fine. So we'll go ahead and save that and see if that made any difference. Hopefully our skull no longer falls out of our scene, but it probably will do. Oh, okay, so it doesn't, but that's good. So our skull now does not doesn't fall out of our scene, so that's good. So let's go and say, where is it? In our set strips, we're just gonna do this part. So I think this yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and reset our position of our skull. So let's go and say, was it vector? Not vector 2, vector 3. Direction is equal to the position that we pass in minus the center position dot position, center position dot position. Keep getting confused. So that looks good. And then we want to go ahead and say skull dot transform dot position is equal to position plus the direction that we just created. Then we want to normalize that, and then we want to times that by our skull position offset. So this is another variable or another float value that we're going to create up here. So this is going to offset our skull slightly, just so it looks like it's not in the middle of the slingshot. So we will go ahead and set that in the inspector just so that we can play around with the values and get the right value that we need. And then after that, the last thing we want to do is go skull dot transform dot right is equal to minus direction, and we'll go ahead and normalize. Well, we'll try and normalize it. Normalized. Okay, so let's go ahead and play with these values and see what value we need to use. So if we go back to our scene and then we'll play it and see what we get. Okay, so now our skull is now in our slingshot, and you can see if we drag it out, the skull comes with the comes with the slingshot. So there you go, that's what it looks like. That's perfect. What I want to do is I just want to change the collider on it, just to make it a little bit bigger, so that we can probably like that. So let's see if that makes any better. So now, yeah, so now we can click on the skull and we can drag it out. So that's working perfect. So that's what we wanted. Now that we've got that working, we want to go and add some force to our skull, so whenever we pull it out and release it, the skull actually goes flying in the opposite direction. So let us go and add some force to our skull. So if we go back into our code, let us go and create a force. So let's say skull force. Well, first of all, we need to give this a type of float. Why can I not type today? So that looks good. And then what we want to do is let us actually make this public, so that if we want to reduce the amount of force that we are adding, we can do, and we can play with the values in the inspector to see what best suits the game. Okay, and then now we want to go ahead and create another function or method and call this shoot. So this will allow us to shoot the skull off. So let's go and say private void shoot. And in here we can go and create our skull force. So let's go and say create a new vector 3, and we will call this skull force. We will set this to the current position minus the center position dot position, and we will times this by the force that we just created, and then we will times this by -1 because we want it to shoot in the opposite direction that we pull the slingshot out. So if we didn't add this -1 into it, when we released it, it will just carry on going to, was it the left, which is not what we wanted. So what's happening here? So let us go and say current position minus center. Okay, so this needs to be current position, like that, and this needs to be center position dot position. So clearly we didn't do that in the first case. So let's see. Okay, so we no longer get any error, so that's looking good. And then let us go and add this force onto our skull's velocity. So let's go skull skull.velocity is equal to the newly skull force that we just created, just like this. So no errors. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to go and say skull is equal to null, and same as our skull collider is equal to null. And then what we want to do after this is, because we destroy this, we want to go and create another skull. So we can go ahead and invoke our create skull method. So let's go and say invoke with a name of what is it called? Create skull? Yeah, so create skull. And we want to do that probably after roughly 2 seconds, so we'll just add 2 for now. Okay, so that looks good. And then in our update function, let us no, not an update function, sorry, we want to go ahead and call this the shoot method in on mouse up. So whenever we release our mouse, we want to go ahead and call, what do we call it? Shoot. Yeah, shoot right there. So shoot. So now that should allow us to shoot off our skull. So let us go and save that, and then jump back into Unity and see what happens. Hopefully we get lucky and this works first time. So let us go ahead and play our game. We will pull it back and release it. Okay, nothing happened, so let's go see what happens. Object reference not set to an instance, so slingshot. Let's see what's missing. No reference exception. Object reference not set to an instance, so slingshot 13, so 113 or a 9. So okay. Okay, so for our skull position offset, I think that's the error. So let's go ahead and see what we want to set that to. Let us probably say 2 maybe. Okay, clearly that's not the problem, but we want to set that back to 0 just because we don't want it to move out of our slingshot. So let's see. Did we misspell something here? So we get an error in this line. So skull.transform.position. Okay, so I think I know. So first of all, we want to check if we actually have a skull. So let's go and check if skull. Then we want to go and do all of this. So if we do have a skull, let's do that. So hopefully we no longer get any errors. And obviously if we don't have a skull, don't do anything. So now that we have a skull in our slingshot, if we pull it back and release it, we don't get the force added to it, but we don't get any errors. So let's see what's happening. So let's jump back into, actually, I think, no, okay, so that's fine. So let's go in here and say, let's see, create skull is kinematic is equal to 2, that's fine. And then what else do we want to do? So let's see, that's fine. So us go and say, before we shoot the skull off, we need to set the skulls is kinematic is equal to false. And then when we create another skull, we obviously set it to equal to true. So let us go back into Unity, and hopefully this works. So let's go ahead and play this. So if we release it, okay, clearly that's wrong, that's not what we wanted. Okay, but we'll go ahead and fix it somehow. Alright, so let's see what's happening here. So first of all, we're setting up our line renderers and setting the positions of them, then we create our skull, and then in our update function we check if mouse is down, create a new mouse position, set that position to 10, change the camera position, set the current position, it's fine. Then we want to clamp our boundary, yeah, and then set our position of our strips. And then we check if we have a skull collider, we'll set that equal to true or enable it. And then obviously if we don't click on the mouse button on the collider, we want to go ahead and reset our strip position so that it looks like it's idle. And then on mouse down we set that to true, on mouse up we set it to false, and obviously once we release it we go ahead and shoot our skull. So that's all looking good, so there's no reason why this shouldn't really work. Let's see. So in our shoot function we go ahead and set our skull is kinematic to equal to false, and then we create a new skull force. And then we create our new skull force in the opposite direction of the way we're pulling it back, and then we go ahead and add our velocity to, we go ahead and add our force to our velocity of the skull, and then we set our skull is equal to 0 and our skull collider equals to 0. And then after a few seconds we invoke and create a new skull. Okay, so I think in here we forgot to do something. So in our reset strips we want to go ahead and say our current position is equal to idle position dot position. Not that this will make much of a difference, but then we'll say our current position in here. So that's probably not going to make a difference, but we'll go ahead and see if that makes any difference. You never know with code. So let's go ahead and play our game. And then let's go ahead and pull that back and release it. Okay, so nothing happens. All it does is just falls out of the scene. So that's interesting. So let's see. Let us have a look and see what's happening here. Oh, that's why we forgot to set our force. So if we play them all, because we haven't, our force is set to 0, we are not doing anything when we release it. So if we play now, we've added our force of about 5. So now when we pull it back and release it, we should see, there we go. So that shoots off nicely. So if we pull this back, the further you pull it back, obviously the more force is added. So you could probably set that to 10 maybe. Oh, let's just see what that looks like. Obviously can't save it in game mode, but there you go. So you get it, there you go. Now that that's working, that's perfect. We are adding some force to our skull. Whenever we pull it back and release it, it shoots off into the opposite direction. So that is how we are going to obviously break all the objects and kill our zombies in the game. So let's have a look. What is time like? Okay, so we're coming up on an hour in this episode, so we will first of all, let's go ahead and save our project. So that's saved, and we will go into Unity and save our project like that. So now let's see, start creating a plane. So we did that, we added a slingshot, added a collider to the ground, so we'll do that. We'll probably go ahead and do the rest of this episode in the next episode, so we'll shift that on to episode 3, just because this episode's getting quite long now. So I think that is it. So let's go ahead and commit this to GitHub, where the GitHub is. Angry zombies. So let's see, what do we do? Slingshot. So let's say created a working slingshot and added force to our skull. Okay, so we'll go ahead and commit that to main. We can go ahead and switch that over, because we are done, so we'll push that to the origin. Okay guys, so I think that's gonna be it for this episode. We're gonna work on adding some colliders to our ground in the next episode, so that when we eventually do fire off our skull, it doesn't just fall out the scene, it actually collides with all the objects as well as lands on the floor. And then we're also going to work on creating the camera movement, so that when we do fire off our skull, the camera moves with the skull, and it doesn't again just fly off the scene and break things outside of the scene. We can actually see what happens. So that's going to be an episode 3. We'll see how we get along with that. But for now, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. And if you haven't seen the first 2 series, please go ahead and watch those, give them a like, and maybe share it with your friends or family, whoever is interested, or whoever you think will be interested. But yeah, I think for now, I think that's it for this episode. So thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you in tomorrow's episode, where we will carry on with our camera movement and our colliders. So thank you, and goodbye.